Hey, it's Min from The Art of Verbal War, where people learn to excel in verbal skills. About 2 weeks ago, the infamous host of a Fox News show, Bill O'Reilly, was fired from his job for sexual harassment allegations. For those of you who don't know who Bill O'Reilly is, he's a controversial, conservative TV talk show host here in America. He was also the host of Fox News Channel's #1 most highly rated show. On this channel, I sometimes like to talk about people who are a bit controversial just to keep it interesting. I recently did a video on LeVar Ball, who's someone that's not very likable and a lot of people detest, but there's a lot of things that you can learn from him. And the same goes for Bill O'Reilly. Look, not everyone can be Harvey Specter or Hank Moody or Don Draper. In real life, people are imperfect, but there's things that we can still learn from them. Even though Bill O'Reilly isn't a particularly likable person, no matter what political aisle you're from, I think there's a few good things to learn from him. And when I say things to learn from him, I'm not talking about being admirable or likable, but in this case, I'm talking about verbal techniques and strategies you can use to help you win and dominate verbal confrontations. So in the spirit of taking great techniques and strategies from anywhere we can find them, putting aside the politics involved, let's pay a little tribute to Bill O'Reilly today. Let's go on to the first clip, here talking about government-funded healthcare.
What Barack Obama's plan wants to do is to not only ensure that all Americans have insurance, but it requires that all 9 million children in America that do not have health insurance, in fact, get it.
Okay. So, all right, we got that. So your healthcare is your big issue, and you believe that Americans, by their birthright, should have government-funded health care if they can't afford it. Their birthright dictates that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you base that on the Constitution, or do you just base that on you being a nice person?
What O'Reilly just did in this video is called giving a binary question. It's like when you tell a child he or she can either do this or that, even though he or she may not want either choice. O'Reilly uses this as a trap, and she's not experienced enough here to know that it's a trap and that she shouldn't answer this binary question. In addition, the choices he gives in this binary question are false choices. O'Reilly uses this technique all the time. In this case, none are necessarily the right answer for Angela Wood, and she walks right into it. With this technique, he gave a false choice, which is the US Constitution, and then kind of a choice that's twisted, you being nice. Wanting health care for all Americans doesn't have to derive from the Constitution or you just being nice. But Angela Wood here walks right into it. Okay, so let's watch where this confrontation goes.
I think that as the wealthiest nation in the world that we
Okay, so it's more of a thing that we have a lot of money and we should spend it in this way. Do you believe that every American by their birthright should have a decent home? Because if you don't have a decent home, chances are your health isn't going to be very good. Does the government owe people who can't afford a nice place to live? And I'm not talking a luxurious condo. I'm just talking a decent home. Do you believe they should have a decent home?
Yes.
Okay, so the government should provide if they can't. How about food? You know, food, nutritious food will keep you healthy. Bad food will not. Should the government provide food to those who can't afford it?
Well, if you look, we do have food stamp
program.
But health insurance is, I believe, a different issue other than, providing housing to people.
But you just said, what I'm trying to get across is what you believe. You believe government should provide health care to those who can't afford it, a decent dwelling to those who can't afford it, and I would assume food. So you're basically going on, and I'm not saying this in any pejorative way at all, a socialist track, that if you can't provide for yourself, the government does. Am I wrong?
I think you exaggerate what I say.
All right.
But
I don't want to exaggerate.
Game over. This technique here is what I call conflating the issue, yet another O'Reilly's technique. He conflates the issue by expanding the original proposition, which is merely healthcare, to other issues such as food and housing, and all of this ends up with him calling her out for being socialist. She didn't come prepared with enough on why healthcare is different from everything else, and she didn't realize the trick that was being played on her. Conflating the issue means expanding the original proposition so that it becomes something else altogether. It's a great way of taking your opponent's issue and then making it easy to shoot down, because in this example it starts with universal healthcare, which is an issue that actually a lot of people might agree with, but it ends up becoming socialism, which far fewer people actually agree with. Okay, we'll come back to Amanda Wood at the end when I talk about the dirtiest and most effective technique.
No, I don't remember seeing him on the set.
Okay. It's hard to believe you saw the report then, Congresswoman, with all due respect. On your website, you took it from...
You and
all right, you saw me, but he was with me. He was with me, and
I
you didn't see him.
also saw the scenes that you put on your report. I saw those.
Yeah, you saw them
and
on
I saw
media.
Your generalizations.
Congresswoman, just listen to me for a minute, because I think you're a good person and a fair person. I don't believe you saw that report. Do me one favor, because I think you're a very good woman. Never again condemn anybody unless you see the total report. Because what I did was not offensive to Asians. I was talking into a context that you didn't see because you took it off a far-left website that is dishonest. And that doesn't do you any good.
So in these two clips, O'Reilly uses a very interesting technique when a debate gets heated in order to make his opponent stand down. Congresswoman, just listen to me for a minute, because I think you're a good person and a fair person. So in this case, he frames her as a reasonable person, because a reasonable person would actually listen and consider the opponent's position. So the Congresswoman stands down here and more fairly considers O'Reilly's point. It's a very interesting technique. Okay, let's go on to the next clip about raising taxes on the uber rich to 50%.
What the Congressional Progressive Caucus is suggesting is we go back to the top tax bracket.
No, this is much simpler
which I think was a pretty good period, you would have to admit, right?
No. I'm not going to admit that because it's not relevant to our discussion. Our discussion is, does the federal government in a free nation, and I emphasize free nation, have the right to take half your stuff, no matter how much money you earn? Do they have the right morally to do that?
Absolutely, Bill. They have the right.
Confiscation of property. And by the way,
the rich have plenty of money. They can help us out in this situation to invest in this country's future.
I don't know if that's freedom, Mr. Callahan.
In this clip, O'Reilly attacks his opponent's narrative of high taxes by simplifying the narrative with a label. He simplifies the position by labeling it confiscation and socialism. Surprise, surprise. And then do you see at the end he simplifies the position further by framing it as against freedom. I don't know if that's freedom, Mr. Callahan. And who can argue against freedom? Again, this is called simplifying your opponent's narrative. You take their original position of high taxes in this case and simplifying it so that it becomes much easier to attack, which is a lack of freedom. So I hope you enjoyed these techniques. The final idea I want to impart on you here is that you can take techniques from anywhere, even from people you may completely dislike or disagree with, such as Bill O'Reilly.
To people.
But you just said, what I'm trying to get across is what you believe. You believe government should provide health care to those who can't afford it.
Well, actually, that's exactly what Ronald Reagan did when he passed his tax law.
I don't care about Ronald Reagan. I want to know if you believe it.
The Congressional Progressive Caucus is suggesting is we go back to the top tax bracket.
This is much simpler
which I think was a pretty good period, you would have to admit, right?
No. I'm not going to admit that because it's not relevant to our discussion.
And now for the final, dirtiest, but effective technique. In these three scenes I just showed you, O'Reilly's opponents try to point to some external fact or third parties who believe the same thing he or she does, such as the fact that food stamps already exist, or that the 1980s were a good time even though tax rates were the highest, or that even Ronald Reagan supported high taxes on the uber rich. However, in each of these three scenes, O'Reilly tries to pin his opponent down to what he or she believes, which allows him to more easily shoot down their ideas. I call this technique isolate and conquer. When it's one person who believes something versus a large group of people who believe something, it's always easier to deal with one person. The moral of the story here is to isolate the opponent's views by not allowing the viewpoints of other people into the debate or external facts. Now, if you want to learn more techniques on how to win and dominate verbal confrontations, you'll love my forthcoming course, Verbal Domination. For a free preview of Verbal Domination, go to www.artofverbalwar.com/verbal domination. I'll send you 3 more techniques and also notify you when the course is finally available. Again, this is Min Liu from the Art of Verbal War. Until next time, keep being excellent and please subscribe to this channel.